I have one question for you, and if we fully explore it, I guarantee it will permanently reshape how you understand consciousness, the universe around you, and even your own sense of self. This question has been asked for thousands of years without a definitive answer. Today, for the first time, science and philosophy are starting to meet, not to solve this problem, but to reveal why the question itself might be more important than any answer. It's a question so fundamental that it touches every aspect of how we understand the world. It intersects with physics, biology, chemistry, and psychology. It stretches logic so far that it snaps, collapsing into paradox. It challenges our understanding of reality itself. And yet, it's so simple a child could ask it. Let's tackle one of the deepest and most important questions humanity has ever asked. What is life? When we ask, what is life, it makes sense to begin with science. Biology, the study of life itself, defines life as a system that maintains homeostasis, is composed of cells, undergoes metabolism, grows and develops, responds to stimuli, reproduces, and evolves over generations through natural selection. Even without a biology background, you might already notice a few problems. To be fair, this checklist is useful. It helps scientists categorize and study living systems. But the reason this question is still so fascinating is because of where this definition breaks down. First, this isn't really a definition. It's a checklist, a description of what most life does, not what life is. It catalogs traits found in Earth-based organisms, but doesn't provide deeper insight into the essence of life itself. And when we apply this checklist to edge cases, like viruses or protocells, things get messy. Some of them don't check every box, yet they're central to how life may have started. If our definition excludes the very things that life may have evolved from, then it's not just incomplete, it's fundamentally flawed. But here's the deeper problem. Most of these traits aren't exclusive to life. Fires consume energy. Crystals grow. Artificial intelligence can respond to stimuli. Computer viruses can replicate and evolve. None of these are alive, yet they have traits we use to define living organisms. Suddenly, the boundary between life and non-life starts to look less like a line and more like a blur. And it gets even weirder when you realize that all living things are made entirely of non-living parts. Proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, none of these are alive. In fact, we can synthesize them in labs from purely non-biological ingredients. So, in the most literal physical sense, life is just non-living matter arranged in an extraordinarily specific way, a sequence of chemical interactions we've chosen to call living. That makes the life-non-life distinction feel less like a hard boundary and more like a matter of perspective. And worse still, the definition we use is entirely Earth-centric. What happens if we discover something on another planet that behaves like life but doesn't meet all 7 criteria? Do we just say it's not alive? That kind of rigidity exposes the narrow lens through which we currently view life. This isn't just philosophical nitpicking. Biologists actively debate this issue. We only have a working definition because science needs something to build on, even if it's imperfect. But let's be honest, biology alone isn't giving us the final answer. So maybe we turn to philosophy. But that opens the door to a different kind of uncertainty. Is life a search for meaning in a meaningless universe, a simulation, a divine test? Well, maybe, but how does that apply to bacteria or fungi? These frameworks often spiral into abstraction, and even poetic ideas like the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth just use life to define life. It's a circular loop with no clear way out. So let's try to go in the opposite direction, down to the smallest components. RNA, DNA, these too can arise from non-living chemistry. So again, we find ourselves blurring the boundary between biology and chemistry. Life stops looking like a sharp category and starts looking like an emergent property, something that arises slowly, unpredictably, from chaotic networks of chemistry. And maybe that's the answer. maybe life isn't a clear-cut category. Maybe it's a gradient, a spectrum stretching from simple chemical reactions to complex self-sustaining systems. Zoom out far enough, and no organism survives alone. Humans rely on trillions of bacterial cells just to digest food, which rely on us to feed them. Life blends together. There's no clear line between one system and the next. If you zoom in far enough, all you'll see are molecules following the laws of physics. The concept of a living thing fades. So, what happens if we accept this? What if we can't define life? If we can't define life, then everything built on that definition begins to wobble. Start with astrobiology, the science of finding life beyond Earth. If we can't draw a clear line between living and non-living, how will we know when we found it? Alien life might not look like us, it might not fit our checklist, it could be all around us, and we'd never even know. Philosophy stumbles too. When does something gain consciousness, or will? If life is a gradient, maybe awareness isn't unique to animals. Maybe even things we call inanimate experience reality in a way we just don't recognize. The boundary between sentience and silence becomes harder to define. Even biology itself starts to look shaky. If viruses replicate and evolve but aren't alive, what exactly is biology studying? Are we just drawing artificial borders to keep our categories clean? The same goes for AI. If we simulate life well enough, at what point does it stop being a simulation and start being life? And if evolution, one of life's core traits, is just a gradual change over time, then maybe evolution isn't exclusive to life. Protocells evolve, chemical networks evolve. Evolution, like life, might just be another emergent behavior of matter. This leads to even deeper questions. If life has no clear beginning, can it have a clear end? If we can't define life, how do we define death? And if we can't define death, what does it mean to kill something, especially when our ethics and legal system depend on that distinction? Even environmentalism shifts. If life is just a pattern of chemicals, then what exactly are we trying to protect? Why is complex chemistry more valuable than simple chemistry? Is the difference even real, or just something we feel? And perhaps more uncomfortably, if life is just chemistry, then so are we. Consciousness, identity, mortality, these may not be uniquely human, or even uniquely alive. They may just be patterns. Now, that sounds bleak, but only if you're stuck in black and white thinking. The real message isn't hopelessness, it's freedom. When we embrace gradiency, we stop pretending our categories are absolute. We see that definitions are tools, not truths, useful but flawed. And that humility is powerful. It means meaning isn't fixed, it evolves, just like life. If life is a pattern, then meaning is too, and you can shape yours however you want. It means perfection isn't the goal. You are always in motion, and that's not a flaw, it's the point. Growth has no finish line, no final failure, just movement. And it means wonder never ends. If certainty disappears, possibility becomes infinite. Death becomes transformation, whether spiritual, like rejoining a greater force, or scientific, like rejoining the cycle of life. Still, we're not done. This is humanity's greatest question for a reason. And if life truly is a gradient, the consequences go even deeper. What comes next might feel disorienting, but by the end, I promise, it will be one of the most liberating ideas you've ever heard. If you felt disoriented by the last section, good. That was the point. There's dozens more complex and unanswerable questions that stem from attempting to define life, but let's focus on one and take it to its absolute end, where logic completely breaks down into paradox. I promise if you keep watching until the end, this rabbit hole will become exponentially more fascinating. Let's begin with our core assumption, that life isn't fundamentally different from non-life, just a more elaborate version of it. If that's true, then the question, what is life, becomes unanswerable, not because we haven't found the right explanation yet, but because no clear boundary exists to explain. Life is a gradient, and gradients don't offer precise definitions, only degrees. But here's where things get stranger. Our understanding of the world comes entirely through our senses, which, if life is just complex chemistry, also emerged from that same gradient. They're not infallible instruments, they're emergent tools from an ambiguous system. And we know they can be wrong. We mishear, missee, and misjudge constantly. So how can we be sure that what our senses report is the truth? If our only tools for experiencing reality are themselves fuzzy, then any conclusions we build on top of them are equally uncertain. This means we can't define anything in black and white. Our categories, our logic, even our facts are born from data that's fundamentally inconsistent at its edges. In that sense, facts, as we commonly define them, don't truly exist for living beings. They may still exist in some objective sense, but if our entire experience is filtered through a system that can't fully access that objectivity, then we can never be entirely sure we've grasped them. Now, add in quantum mechanics. At the smallest level, nature appears to be partially random, and since we are made of those same particles, we must be, to some extent, random too. Yet, here's the paradox. When we observe the world, we see deterministic results. Drop a ball, it falls. Light a match, it burns. Our perceptions are stable, even though the fundamental particles behind them aren't. We're using random systems to generate consistent results, and then using those results to describe a world that may not be consistent at all. It's a loop. This doesn't mean determinism is false, but it does mean determinism and randomness, traditionally viewed as opposites, must be fundamentally connected. They aren't contradictory, they're complementary, two sides of the same coin. Not because we want them to be, but because the very act of observing reality seems to force them into coexistence. But here's the real problem. Logic, the tool we've leaned on to navigate all of this, leads us directly to the conclusion that it might not be enough. Logic leads us to strange places, that life is undefinable, senses unreliable, facts inaccessible, and that randomness and determinism somehow collapse into each other. Logic defines determinism and randomness as opposites, but then leads us to believe they are directly related. So, what do we do when the very tool we trust most tells us it doesn't work? We diversify, we think differently, we allow space for uncertainty, ambiguity, intuition, emotion, and even contradiction. Not because they're right, but because no single method of thinking can explain a reality built on gradients. And this isn't just about life. Asking what is life breaks logic, yes, but it's not the only question that can. In fact, my earlier exploration of free will reaches the same boundary when pushed long enough, where logic runs in circles and ultimately collapses into paradox. It turns out many of our deepest questions converge at the same edge of understanding. So, we stand at a threshold. Beyond it, there is no clarity, no certainty, but that's not a weakness, it's an invitation to explore with humility, to think in new ways, and to embrace a world that refuses to be boxed in by any single definition or framework. Let's quickly recap. Logic led us to three strange but powerful conclusions. Life and non-life overlap. There's no clean line separating the two. Everything is variable, which means possibilities stretch endlessly in every direction. Determinism and randomness aren't opposites. They're constantly interacting, two parts of the same underlying system. On the surface, that might sound chaotic or overwhelming, but when you really sit with it, something shifts. These aren't just abstract observations, they're a different lens, a way of seeing the world that's more alive, more open, and honestly, more meaningful. Here's what that looks like. You're part of a continuous creative universe. Life isn't some weird exception to natural law, it is natural law, just taken further. Consciousness, beauty, emotion, they aren't separate from the cosmos. They're fluent expressions of it, which means you're not outside reality looking in, you're reality looking at itself. And if there's no hard line between non-life and life, then emergence is always possible. Meaning, growth, even consciousness, they can appear where you least expect them. A spark in the dark, a flower in concrete, a reminder to never write off anything as hopeless. There's no final boundary, no ultimate ceiling, because variability is baked into everything. There's always room for reinvention, for discovery, for creation. You're not trapped by destiny, you're dancing with it. And in a universe where every process is shaped by interacting randomness and structure, uniqueness is guaranteed. You aren't one of a kind because you broke the rules. You're one of a kind because the rules ensure it. Progress becomes infinite, not just technological or scientific, but emotional, social, philosophical. There's no end to what we can grow into. And that's not a fantasy, that's the logical conclusion of variability, emergence, and infinite possibility. Stability doesn't require rigidity. The universe holds its shape, not by locking everything down, but by letting things flow, which means uncertainty isn't the enemy of meaning. Sometimes it's the birthplace of it. And even without perfect control, even without total free will, we can still shape reality. Like a surfer doesn't control the wave, but still carves their path into it. Meaning is something we can co-create. It doesn't come from dominating the universe, but from interacting with it. In fact, creativity thrives right at that edge, where chaos meets order, where randomness and determinism merge. That's where new things are born. That's where art happens. That's where you happen. So, what does this all mean? It means the universe isn't cold or mechanical. It's fertile, it's alive with potential, it's fundamentally open-ended. And you're not an outsider looking in, you're a unique, emergent, co-creative part of it, stitched into the fabric of everything, with the power to shape and be shaped. Even in a world without fixed edges, without clean categories or total certainty, there's still movement, there's still connection, there's still beauty. And honestly, I'd take that any day over a rigid black and white world that leaves no room for wonder.